The crystalline archives of Station Nexus 7 sparkled under the artificial daylight, casting rainbow fractals across Dr. Sarah Chin's face as she studied the ancient artifact before her. The piece sat innocently on its pedestal, a simple geometric shape that seemed to capture starlight within its depths. Her research had suggested it was a data storage device, possibly containing the complete historical records of the Phyrexians' first interstellar journey. 20 years of synorchaeology had led to this moment. Her hands, usually steady during the most delicate excavations, trembled slightly as she held them just inches from the artifact's surface. The station's environmental systems hummed quietly, a sound she had grown accustomed to during her 3-month research stay. The first sign of trouble came as a slight vibration through the deck plates. Sarah's eyes flickered to the entrance, where 3 Phyrexian guards stood watching. Their scaled armor caught the light, creating an almost hypnotic pattern of reflections. She had obtained all the proper permissions, filed every required document, followed every protocol. "The readings are stable," she murmured into her recorder, more out of habit than necessity. "Surface temperature consistent with ambient conditions. No detected energy signatures. Proceeding with initial contact analysis." Her fingertips brushed the surface. The reaction was instant. The Phyrexian guards moved with a fluid grace that belied their size, covering the distance between them in seconds. Their crystalline weapons hummed to life, bathing the archive chamber in an ominous blue glow. "Step away from the sacred relic, human," the lead guard's translator crackled. "You have committed an unforgivable transgression." Sarah raised her hand slowly, her mind racing. "There must be some mistake. I have full research clearance from the Cultural Exchange Office. All my documentation." Silence. The word cut through the air like a blade. "You have touched the ancestor's heart with bare hands. Such sacrilege carries only one sentence." The absurdity of the situation struck her. One touch, one moment of contact between skin and surface, and suddenly 20 years of peaceful research meant nothing. She could see it in their posture, in the way their secondary eyes refused to meet hers. They had already decided her fate. Her comm unit chimed softly. A message from her research partner back on Earth. "Data received. Your readings match our predictions perfectly. The artifact is exactly what we thought. A key to understanding their entire civilization. Great work, Sarah." The message's timestamp made her heart sink. 2 minutes too late. The Phyrexian guards encircled her, their movements precise and practiced. The lead guard activated his command interface, and suddenly every screen in the archive chamber blazed to life. She realized with growing horror that they were broadcasting. "Let this serve as a lesson," the guard announced, his translator struggling to convey the formal tones of ritual judgment. "The laws of the Phyrexian Empire are absolute. The punishment for sacrilege is death." Sarah straightened her back, years of diplomatic training taking over. If these were to be her final moments, they would carry meaning. She looked directly into the nearest camera, knowing the feed would reach Earth. "Remember why," she said clearly, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Remember why we reach for the stars." The guard's weapon hummed higher. In the last fraction of a second before everything went dark, Sarah thought of all the notes she had taken, all the data she had already transmitted back to Earth. Even now, she had followed proper research protocols. Even now, she had contributed to humanity's understanding of the universe. The feed cut to black. Across Earth and its colonies, millions of screens showed the same final image. A human scientist, standing tall in a room full of alien treasures, facing her end with dignity and purpose. For several long moments, no one spoke. Then the notifications began to roll in. Scientists canceling their research partnerships, traders suspending their routes, diplomats going dark. One by one, humanity began to move with singular purpose. The Phyrexians had made a fatal error. They had killed a human and expected silence. They would learn. Admiral James Chen watched the starfield through the bridge viewport of the ESS Horizon, his sister's final words still echoing in his thoughts. "Remember why." The words had become a whisper across human space, passed from ship to ship, station to station, a quiet reminder of purpose. "Status report," he said softly, his voice carrying easily in the hushed atmosphere of the bridge. "All systems prepared for shutdown." "Admiral," his first officer responded, "we're receiving confirmation from the fleet. Everyone is in position." The plan had come together with remarkable speed. No emergency meetings, no panicked responses, just quiet, methodical preparation. The Vrexians had expected chaos, hysteria, perhaps even a foolish retaliatory strike. Instead, they got something far more terrifying. Coordinated silence. Execute protocol nightfall. Across the viewport, running lights began to dim on every human vessel. Hundreds of ships, from massive carriers to small merchant vessels, their lights winking out one by one like stars going dark. Passive scanners showed the same thing happening in every sector where humans operated. The alien vessels nearby shifted uncomfortably. Their sensors probed the human fleet, finding only minimal power signatures, no weapons charging, no shields raising. Just silence. "Message from the Vrexian diplomatic vessel," the comm officer announced. "They're demanding to know our intentions." James allowed himself a small smile. No response necessary. His tablet chimed with updates from across human space. Trade hubs going quiet. Research stations powering down. Cultural exchanges suspended. Each notification represented thousands of small, crucial interactions grinding to a halt. The Zaxxor trade representative on board was practically vibrating with nervous energy. "Admiral, surely we can discuss this. The Vrexian Empire is too powerful to challenge directly." "We're not challenging anyone," James replied, his eyes still fixed on the darkening fleet. "We're simply stepping back, taking a moment to grieve." More updates flowed in. Human merchants calling in debts. Research teams archiving their data and departing alien facilities. Tourism dropping to zero. Each action small, measured, yet part of a greater whole. The Vrexian diplomatic vessel tried hailing them 3 more times. Each call met with silence. Their sensors continued to sweep the human fleet, searching for signs of aggression, finding only the unsettling quiet of powered-down systems. "Sir," his first officer whispered, "the Centauri Exchange just suspended all Vrexian currency trading. Their economy." James nodded. The pieces were falling into place. Humanity had spent generations building connections, establishing trade routes, becoming essential to the galactic community. Now they would learn what happened when all that simply stopped. A small alert flashed on his screen. A private message from Earth Command. The corners of his mouth tightened as he read it. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The Vrexians had killed his sister expecting no consequences. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "Admiral," the sensor officer called out, "we're detecting increased activity from the Vrexian fleet. They appear to be backing away." Of course they were. The silence was unnerving them. Every species in the galaxy knew humans as constant communicators, eternal diplomats, endless traders. This absolute stillness was something alien and frightening. "Maintain current status," James ordered. "Let them wonder." The darkness spread across human space like a tide. Not the darkness of aggression or war, but the darkness of absence, of choices being reconsidered, of consequences beginning to unfold. On his personal screen, James opened the last research notes his sister had transmitted before her death. In them, she had mapped out every weakness in Vrexian society, every pressure point in their economy, every secret they thought safely hidden. She had done it not out of malice, but out of scientific curiosity. Now that knowledge would serve another purpose. "Remember why," he whispered to the starfield, where the running lights of human ships continued to dim. "Remember why we reach for the stars." And in the darkness, humanity prepared to teach the galaxy a lesson about the true cost of underestimating Earth. The Grand Overseer of the Vrexian Empire stared at the holographic displays surrounding his command podium, his scaled fingers tapping an anxious rhythm on the crystalline surface. Something was wrong. The patterns were changing, but he couldn't quite grasp how or why. Another trade route has gone dark, his economic advisor reported, adding another red line to the tangled web of galactic commerce. The Meridian Consortium has suspended all shipments through Phyrexian space. On what grounds? The overseer demanded. They cite maintenance concerns. The advisor's secondary eyes blinked rapidly, a sign of distress. Just like the others. The excuses were always different, yet somehow the same. Maintenance issues, scheduling conflicts, resource allocation adjustments, small things, trivial things, yet they were beginning to add up to something far more significant. In her private office on Europa Station, Director Lin Zhang of the Human Diplomatic Corps reviewed the latest updates. Her screen showed a cascade of seemingly unrelated events spreading across the galaxy. A Centaurian mining corporation suspending operations in Phyrexian territory. A Proximan Research Institute withdrawing its funding from joint projects. Thousands of individual decisions, each with a common thread. Somewhere in their chain of command sat a human who remembered Sarah Chen. Update from the Andromedian Trade Federation, her AI assistant reported. They're requesting clarification on humanity's stance regarding the Phyrexian situation. Lin smiled softly. The Andromedians had always been clever. They could see the pattern forming. Send them the standard response. We are simply taking time to process our grief. The response was deliberately vague, yet perfectly clear to anyone who had spent time understanding humans. The Andromedians would make their own choices, but they would do so knowing that humanity remembered its friends and its enemies. Back in Phyrexian space, a junior cultural analyst was frantically compiling data for her superiors. Her report painted a disturbing picture. Humans had spent generations building relationships across the galaxy. Not through grand alliances or military pacts, but through countless small connections. A human doctor who had saved a Proximan merchant's child. A human engineer who had solved a critical problem for a Centaurian mining colony. A human artist who had bridged cultural gaps through her work. Each connection represented a debt, a favor owed, a relationship valued. Now those connections were activating. The humans aren't even making demands, she reported to the increasingly concerned council. They're not asking anyone to choose sides. They're simply stepping back, and others are choosing to step back with them. In the Outer Rim territories, a Phyrexian supply officer struggled to explain to his superiors why critical shipments weren't arriving. The shipping company cited routine maintenance. The alternate route was temporarily closed for scheduling optimization. The backup supplier was conducting inventory assessments. None of these events were officially connected to the execution of a single human scientist. Yet every being he contacted seemed to have a story about some human who had helped them, taught them, worked with them, or saved them. On Earth, the diplomatic corps maintained its silence. No threats, no demands, just the quiet certainty that the galaxy would understand the message being sent. The Phyrexian Empire had built its power on military might and cultural dominance. They had never considered that true strength might lie in countless small kindnesses, in debts of gratitude, in friendships forged one interaction at a time. As their supply lines slowed and their trade routes emptied, they began to realize their mistake. They had killed a human, expecting no consequences beyond perhaps a formal protest. Instead, they were discovering that humanity's real power had nothing to do with weapons or warships. It lay in the simple truth that humans collected more than just knowledge. They collected connections. And now, in the silence of space, those connections were shifting like stars realigning themselves in the night sky, forming a new pattern that the Phyrexians were only beginning to understand. The University of Mars Archive Center hummed with activity as researchers combed through decades of collected data. Dr. Marcus Way stood before the central holographic display, watching as layers of information coalesced into patterns. Tourist photos, merchant logs, student papers, cultural exchange reports, seemingly random pieces forming a precise picture. Processing the last batch of synorchaeology records now, his assistant reported. Dr. Chen's final data transmission is proving particularly interesting. Marcus nodded, his eyes fixed on the display. Sarah Chen hadn't just been studying that artifact. She had been completing a puzzle that humanity had been assembling for generations. Cross-reference with the tourist photos from the crystal sanctuaries, he ordered. Focus on the architectural patterns. The images flowed across the screen, thousands of vacation snapshots taken by humans visiting Vrexian worlds. Tourists posing before ancient buildings, merchants photographing marketplace walls, students documenting their exchange trips. Each image captured more than just memories. In the Vrexian High Council chamber, an emergency session descended into chaos. "How do they know?" a council member demanded, slamming his scaled hand on the crystalline table. How could they possibly know about the structural weaknesses in the ancient temples? The answer, had they understood it, was simple. Humans never stopped asking questions, never stopped documenting, never stopped sharing what they learned. Every human who had ever visited their worlds had been unconsciously contributing to a vast database of knowledge. Back in the Archive Center, Marcus opened another file. Display the market analysis from the past 50 years. Trade records materialized. Not just official transactions, but personal logs from human merchants. Notes about which Vrexian nobles preferred which luxuries. Observations about seasonal price fluctuations. Comments about which products seemed to hold special cultural significance. They weren't just trading, his assistant whispered. They were mapping the entire economic structure. In Vrexian space, another crisis was unfolding. Someone had released proof that several of their most sacred relics were replicas, not originals. The evidence was overwhelming. Detailed scans taken by human scientists over decades, cross-referenced with geological data from human mining surveys. Who authorized these studies? The High Priest demanded. The junior archivist trembled. "We did, Your Eminence." The humans always asked permission. They said they wanted to understand our culture better. On a space station orbiting Jupiter, Commander Elena Santos reviewed the latest intelligence reports. The Vrexians were discovering just how thoroughly humans had mapped their society, not through espionage or infiltration, but through simple, persistent curiosity. "They're trying to classify all research data as restricted," her analyst reported. "But it's too late. We already have everything we need." Elena nodded, remembering conversations with Sarah Chen about the importance of proper documentation. "Send the next package to the Galactic Academic Network. Let's show them what else we've learned." The Vrexian Empire had built its power on secrets, hidden weaknesses in ancient structures, economic dependencies they thought no one noticed, cultural myths they had carefully maintained. They had never imagined that their greatest threat would come from decades of humans simply paying attention. In the Mars Archive Center, Marcus opened Sarah Chen's final research notes. She had died studying their artifacts, but her death would reveal a different truth. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their military might. It was their endless drive to understand, to document, to share knowledge. "Begin distribution," he ordered. "Let them see what happens when you kill a scientist." Across the galaxy, data began to flow. Not military secrets or classified intelligence, but the accumulated observations of countless humans who had watched, learned, and remembered. The Vrexians were about to discover that they had never truly been mysterious to humanity. They had been studied, documented, and understood. And now, that understanding would become their undoing. The quantum computers at Earth's Strategic Information Center processed the final calculations as Dr. Maya Rodriguez reviewed the simulation one last time. Decades of economic data, cultural analyses, and social patterns flowed through neural networks designed to predict the cascade effects of information release. Probability modeling complete, the system announced. Optimal sequence determined. Maya studied the projected outcomes, each pathway branching like neural connections across the display. The Vrexian Empire had built their society on carefully maintained perceptions. Now those perceptions would become their weakness. "Initialize Protocol Daybreak," she commanded. Across the galaxy, information began to flow with surgical precision. Not in a flood, but in carefully measured drops, each placed exactly where it would create the maximum ripple effect. On the Vrexian homeworld, a minor trade official received an innocuous report about crystalline resonance patterns in ancient structures. Within hours, property values in the historic district plummeted as wealthy families quietly began relocating their precious artifacts. "The humans are releasing their research data," a cultural minister reported to the High Council. "They claim it's in the interest of academic transparency." In the Outer Rim, a seemingly routine trade analysis revealed subtle patterns in Vrexian resource distribution. Trading algorithms, designed to detect market inefficiencies, began automatically adjusting their models. The Vrexian currency dropped 3 points before anyone noticed. Maya watched the data streams, monitoring the cascade of subtle changes. No dramatic revelations, no explosive secrets, just precisely calibrated truth, released at exactly the right moments to exactly the right audiences. "Second phase ready," her assistant reported. "Cultural impact analyses are complete." On a dozen worlds, archaeological studies quietly published their findings about Vrexian historical sites. Each paper was meticulously researched, peer-reviewed, and completely legitimate. Together, they painted a picture that challenged centuries of Vrexian cultural narratives. The Vrexian response came swiftly. "They're attacking our heritage," a council member raged. "We must silence these lies." But they weren't lies. Every revelation came with supporting data, collected over decades by human researchers who had always been more interested in truth than power. The more the Vrexians protested, the more attention they drew to the findings. In her office on Luna Station, Maya opened a holo message from Admiral Chen. The economic models were proving even more accurate than predicted. The Vrexian Empire's strength had always been built on perception. The perception of cultural superiority, of economic inevitability, of technological advancement. Now those perceptions were being challenged not by weapons, but by data. Not by accusations, but by evidence. Not by force, but by truth. "Release the market analysis," she ordered. "Let's show them what else we've learned." The information spread through financial networks like a digital whisper. Trading patterns that revealed hidden dependencies. Supply chain analyses that exposed structural weaknesses. Economic models that predicted systematic vulnerabilities. The Vrexian Empire had never understood why humans documented everything so obsessively. They had dismissed it as a primitive compulsion, never realizing they were watching the assembly of the most powerful weapon ever created: knowledge. "They're trying to restrict information flow," her analyst reported. "Setting up new firewalls, increasing data security." Maya smiled softly. "They still don't understand. The information is already out there. Has been for years. We're just helping people see the patterns." Across Vrexian space, their carefully constructed image began to shift. Not through revolution or rebellion, but through the steady erosion of carefully maintained illusions. Each new piece of information caused subtle shifts in behavior, in trading patterns, in social structures. The Vrexians had killed a scientist, expecting no consequence beyond the loss of a single life. Instead, they were discovering that humanity's greatest weapon had always been its relentless pursuit of understanding. And now, that understanding would reshape the galaxy. The Grand Archive of the Centaurian Assembly buzzed with activity as representatives from 30 species gathered for an emergency session. High above the crystalline chamber, holographic displays tracked the ongoing transformation of the Vrexian Empire, not through war or violence, but through the steady revelation of truth. Ambassador Xalith of the Proximan Confederation rose to address the assembly, their bioluminescent patterns shifting with barely contained amazement. "We have all witnessed conflicts between civilizations. We have seen empires rise and fall through force of arms. But this is something entirely new." The displays showed another market crash in Vrexian space as 3 more trading houses withdrew their support. not due to threats or coercion, but because newly released economic data made continued investment untenable. The humans are not destroying their enemy. Zalith continued. They are transforming them, not through weapons, but through understanding. Not through force, but through revelation. In a private chamber adjacent to the archive, the Andromedian Strategic Council reviewed the latest reports. Their crystalline neural matrices hummed as they processed the implications of humanity's response. They spent generations preparing this, the first speaker observed. Every human who visited Vrexian space was a sensor. Every cultural exchange was a data-gathering mission. Every trade deal was a mapping exercise. The second speaker's crystals pulsed with realization. They weren't building an empire. They were building a network of knowledge. On distant worlds, other species watched and learned. The Vrexian Empire had stood for millennia, their influence built on carefully maintained illusions of superiority. Now those illusions were being systematically dismantled, not by armies, but by the patient revelation of truth. Another temple complex has been evacuated, a junior analyst reported to the assembly. The humans released structural analysis showing dangerous resonance patterns in the crystal formations. The data was irrefutable. Centuries of subtle scanning by human tourists and researchers, compiled into a comprehensive study of architectural weaknesses. The Vrexians couldn't suppress the information without admitting they had known about the dangers all along. In the observation gallery, a young diplomatic trainee watched in fascination as the latest economic projections appeared. But why didn't they just attack? She asked her mentor. They have the military capability. The elder diplomat's scales shifted color thoughtfully. Because humans understand something we're only beginning to grasp. True power isn't in destroying your enemies. It's in understanding them so completely that they can no longer hide from themselves. The displays showed another wave of information spreading through galactic networks. Trade records revealing economic dependencies, cultural studies highlighting social pressures, geological surveys exposing resource limitations. Each piece of data another strand in a web the humans had spent generations weaving. They're not even releasing secrets, a Centaurian analyst marveled. Everything they're sharing was legally obtained, properly documented, and scientifically verified. The Vrexians authorized every study, approved every analysis. The assembly watched as another Vrexian trading house collapsed under the weight of market corrections prompted by newly released economic data. No accusations of manipulation could stand. The humans were simply sharing their research. In the center of the chamber, the final casualty reports from the station, where Dr. Chen died, were displayed. One life, one human life, ended because the Vrexians thought they could act without consequences. They didn't understand what they were facing, Zalith concluded. They saw humans as scattered individuals, never realizing that each human was part of something larger. Not an empire of territory or weapons, but an empire of knowledge. The assembly fell silent as the implications sank in. They had all dismissed human curiosity as a charming weakness. Their constant questions, their endless documentation, their obsessive need to understand everything they encountered. Now they realized the truth. Humanity's greatest weapon had never been hidden. It had been studying them all along. The crystalline spires of the new Galactic Institute for Cultural Understanding rose from the exact spot where Dr. Chen had died. Sunlight from the station's distant star filtered through the transparent structures, casting rainbow patterns across the gathering of species below. Director Thomas Chen, Sarah's father, stood at the podium, his weathered hands resting on its smooth surface. The memorial hall was packed with beings from across the galaxy, scientists, diplomats, students, and even a delegation from the reformed Vrexian government. My daughter believed that understanding was the path to peace, he began, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. She spent her life studying other cultures not to exploit them, but to build bridges between worlds. The main hall's displays showed scenes from across known space, new cultural exchange centers opening on dozens of worlds, research facilities dedicated to cross-species understanding, libraries where knowledge flowed freely between civilizations. We could have chosen destruction, Thomas continued. We had the power to strike back, to answer death with death. Instead, we chose to honor Sarah's work in the only way that mattered, by turning tragedy into transformation. In orbit above, the Earth ship Horizon maintained its watch. Admiral James Chen looked down at the station, where his sister had died, now transformed into a beacon of learning. The weapons that had once been primed for revenge had never been fired. They hadn't needed to be. On the station's promenade, a young Vrexian scholar approached a human researcher, their scales shifting in patterns that indicated deep respect. "We did not understand then," they said softly. "We thought knowledge was something to be hoarded, protected, controlled." The human smiled, offering a data crystal containing their latest research. Knowledge only grows when it's shared. Dr. Chen taught us that. In the Memorial Hall Center, a holographic display showed the newly ratified Galactic Charter of Scientific Exchange. The document, already signed by over 200 species, guaranteed the rights of researchers and established protocols for cultural interaction. The Chen Protocols, as they had come to be known, transformed how civilizations interacted. No longer could knowledge be weaponized or cultural misunderstandings lead to death. Every species had to provide clear guidelines for cultural taboos, and researchers had protected status across known space. "Look at what we've built," Thomas gestured to the gathered crowd. "Not an empire of force, but a network of understanding. Not a victory through destruction, but a triumph through transformation." The displays showed more images from across the galaxy. Former Vrexian temples, once closed to outsiders, now served as centers of learning. Their sacred artifacts, previously hidden away, were now studied openly, their true history and significance shared with all who wished to learn. In the audience, a group of young archaeologists from various species sat together, sharing notes and observations. They represented the first class of the new Galactic Science Academy, their presence a living testament to Sarah's dream of open exchange between cultures. "The universe is vast," Thomas concluded, looking out at the assembled beings. "Too vast for any one species to understand alone. But together, through shared knowledge and mutual understanding, we can unlock its mysteries." Above the podium, a simple hologram appeared, the artifact Sarah had died studying. But now its secrets were known, its purpose understood, its significance appreciated by all. Not as a sacred relic to be feared, but as a piece of shared heritage to be studied and celebrated. The Vrexian delegation rose first, joining in the applause that filled the hall. They had learned perhaps the most important lesson of all, that true strength lies not in keeping secrets, but in sharing understanding. As the applause faded, Thomas touched the memorial plaque beside the podium. The inscription was simple but profound. "In memory of Dr. Sarah Chen, who taught us that the greatest power lies not in what we hide, but in what we share. One life changed the galaxy not through force, but through understanding." The universe had learned, and it would remember. The new Vrexian delegation stood before the Earth Council, their scales shimmering with the traditional colors of humility. 5 years had passed since a single human death had transformed the galaxy. Now they had come to make amends. High Mediator Kellic stepped forward, his translator deactivated. He had learned to speak human standard language, a sign of respect that did not go unnoticed by the council. "We come bearing more than apologies," he announced, his voice carrying across the chamber. "We come seeking to understand the lesson you have taught us." The chamber's displays showed scenes from across former Vrexian space, where once stood imposing temples of secrecy, now rose centers of learning. Their sacred archives, previously hidden from outside eyes, had become libraries open to all species. "We expected you to demand reparations," Kellic continued. "Territory, resources, technology. Instead, you showed us something we had never considered, the power of shared knowledge." Director Lin Zhang of the Human Diplomatic Corps studied the delegation. Their body language, once rigid with pride, now showed openness. The change wasn't born from humiliation or defeat, but from genuine transformation. The Vrexian Empire was built on walls, she responded. Walls of secrecy, walls of tradition, walls of fear. Dr. Chen spent her life trying to build bridges instead. Today, we honor her work by continuing to build those bridges. The delegation presented their proposal. The former Imperial Palace would become the galaxy's largest cinecultural research facility. Their most skilled craftsmen would help construct new learning centers across known space. Their vast archives would be digitized and shared freely. In the observation gallery, a young human xenorchaeologist sat beside a Vrexian student. They were collaborating on a project about cultural exchange methodologies, their differences forgotten in the pursuit of understanding. The data suggests an 87% reduction in interspecies conflicts since the implementation of the Chen protocols, an analyst reported. The free exchange of cultural and scientific knowledge has revolutionized how species interact. The Earth Council members exchanged glances. This was the real victory, not the fall of an empire, but its transformation into something new, something better. We have a counter-proposal, Director Zhang announced. Instead of building separate research facilities, let us build them together. Let us show the galaxy what true cooperation can achieve. The displays shifted to show preliminary designs, massive structures that combined Earth's innovative architecture with Vrexian crystal engineering. Centers of learning that would draw scholars from across known space. You could have destroyed us, Kellix observed. Your weapons were ready. Your fleets were positioned. Instead, you chose to share knowledge. Why? The answer came from Dr. Thomas Chen, who had joined the council after his daughter's death. Because destruction only ends things. Understanding transforms them. The chamber fell silent as the implications of those words settled. The Vrexians had killed a human, expecting either passive acceptance or violent retaliation. Instead, they had received something far more powerful, the opportunity to change. As the delegation signed the new cooperation treaties, news spread across the galaxy. Species that had once viewed humans as unpredictable now saw them as wise. Civilizations that had valued secrecy began embracing openness. The final display showed an image from Station Nexus 7, where it had all begun. A group of children from different species played beneath the memorial statue, sharing stories and dreams without fear or prejudice. Remember why we reach for the stars. Director Zhang quoted Sarah Chen's last words. Not to conquer them, but to understand them. Not to impose our will, but to share our knowledge. The universe had learned a profound truth. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its ability to destroy enemies, but in its power to transform them into friends. And somewhere, in the vast expanse of space, a single human life had changed everything. Not through her death, but through the legacy of understanding she left behind.